When you see some of the monsters and entities they try to contain, it's easy to think of the SCP Foundation as the good guys. And granted, when you observe the magnitude of threats like the Scarlet King, it's hard for anyone to not look like a downright moral paragon in comparison. But the Foundation aren't always knights in shining armor. Sometimes they themselves have committed horrific atrocities in order to keep their supernatural subjects under wraps and keep the rest of us safe from anomalous terror. Nowhere is that more clear than a deadly incident that occurred in 2010. The Foundation had been aware of the Slow Burn Sloth for decades, and many believe that the entity has existed for as long as human beings have consumed visual media. Movies, TV, web pages, and even print media, like books and magazines, are vulnerable. Technically speaking, the name SCP-2774 refers to whatever visual medium is currently holding the true entity, known as SCP-2774-A. Thankfully, SCP-2774-A has never made it onto the internet, where it could do truly catastrophic damage, but the Foundation has prepared for that possibility. They've invented a software program, web crawler A03G32, designed to constantly monitor all forms of online visual media for an appearance of SCP-2774-A. So, what is SCP-2774-A? What could possibly be so scary that even a picture of it leaking onto the internet could potentially lead to the collapse of human civilization? Simply put, SCP-2774-A is this image of an unknown humanoid entity in a bizarre sloth costume. While this picture may seem harmless, that's only because it's black and white, and any red or green hues have been neutralized from the image. Anyone who isn't red-green colorblind and somehow accidentally sees the true version of SCP-2774-A has a fate far worse than death in store for them. This is the same fate that would befall almost the entire population of the northern Canadian town of Harper Ridge in 2010. The residents of this small township were waking up and going about their morning. Some were getting ready for work, others enjoying a leisurely breakfast in front of the television set. All of those affected had unknowingly made the deadly mistake of watching the local news that morning. While the anchor droned on about some local economic statistics and delivered a dry advertisement for an upcoming town festival, the familiar image of something in a sloth costume appeared briefly on the set behind him. Most of the Harper Ridge residents who viewed the broadcast didn't even notice the sloth, but in that fateful instant, almost every single one of them was doomed. The slow burn sloth doesn't always affect everyone who sees it. Foundation scientists have found that it generally only affects 40% of people exposed to it, and doesn't affect those suffering from colorblindness at all. However, one of the more frightening details about the sloth, which is classified as a memetic image SCP for its ability to spread and appear randomly almost anywhere, is that it grows more powerful and more contagious with every living victim it affects. After claiming a significant number of new victims, say from a small Canadian town, SCP-2774-A's infection rate can rise to as high as 60% or beyond. The residents of Harper Ridge made their own predator deadlier without even knowing it. At a nearby Foundation facility, units were already mobilizing. It was too late for those who had already seen the slow burn sloth, but others could potentially be saved if the situation was contained quickly. In addition to the web crawler constantly monitoring the internet, the SCP Foundation also had a huge number of dedicated teams scanning broadcasts worldwide for potential instances of SCP-2774-A exposure. When one of these teams detected the sloth's presence in Harper's Ridge's morning newscast and found that upwards of 4,000 civilians had already been exposed, they knew there was no time to waste. Back in Harper Ridge, the situation was already deteriorating. A few hours had passed since the broadcast, and those who were exposed were beginning to experience strange symptoms already. First, it was a sense of tiredness and lethargy. Then, an unusual heaviness to their body, as though they were experiencing sudden, extreme muscle fatigue. People exposed to SCP-2774-A also experienced clouded cognition. Even thinking straight became a real struggle. It was at this point that the true effects of witnessing the Slow Burn Sloth began to take hold, around 6 hours after initial exposure. Little by little, the infected lost all cognitive functions and higher-level decision-making abilities. Their bodies still acted out basic movements very slowly, seemingly just as a result of muscle memory, but they had no control over what was going on. They became, essentially, living zombies, trapped in their own bodies and only dimly aware of it. This horrifying experience was completely consistent with prior Foundation research into the effects of viewing SCP-2774-A. And in a twist almost crueler than permanent zombification, victims of the Slow Burn Sloth are randomly allocated around 150 seconds of lucidity every 24 hours, before being forced back into their zombified state. Just as 4,000 of Harper Ridge's residents were beginning to experience these effects, all local communication channels to the town were cut off by the Foundation. Well-equipped teams of Mobile Task Force operators began arriving on the scene shortly after, accompanied by a number of containment units in the form of buses and trucks. Lucky for them, the zombified victims of the Slow Burn Sloth were incredibly docile and compliant by nature. Shepherding all 4,000 of them into the containment units were almost like working with cattle. Some non-infected local residents attempted to protest the sudden abduction of their zombified loved ones. These residents were subdued and either had their memories wiped with Foundation amnestics or were terminated on sight. Like with almost any conceivable situation, the SCP Foundation already had measures in place for a mass exposure event like this. All in all, a mere 4,000 was still on the low end of the potential infection scale. The 4,000 victims were secretly taken to Site-116, a Foundation testing site under the direction of Dr. Martin and his second-in-command, Dr. Clara Chung. There, they'd already been pursuing research on approximately 2,400 infected subjects from prior incidents, including Foundation personnel who were accidentally infected during the monitoring process. Thus far, it seemed that the condition caused by witnessing the Slow Burn Sloth was incurable, and with 6,400 known living victims situated at Site-116, SCP-2774-A was at an unprecedented level of power. All site personnel were instructed to proceed with caution and carefully observe the behavior of their new test subjects. Dr. Chung spearheaded the majority of the hands-on research into the infected residents of Harper Ridge and observed some interesting phenomenon in the victims' behavioral patterns as the condition escalated. The infected subjects, even in their largely zombified state, developed an almost fanatically religious obsession with the image of the Slow Burn Sloth. When left to their own devices, they would create idols of SCP-2774-A. These included amateur sculptures made of hoarded garbage, images drawn of the sloth with any materials they could get their hands on, or even writing obsessively about the sloth. Dr. Chung speculated that this behavior was perhaps an act of appeasement on the victim's part, hoping to somehow sate the Slow Burn Sloth and lessen its effects on them through worship. However, she would later find out that the truth of the matter was far more disturbing. Initially due to their largely docile states, the subjects imprisoned in Site-116 were given a relatively long leash. The subjects were even allocated 2 hours a day for social interaction with fellow subjects at mealtimes and during a designated recreational period. During these times, the subjects would often trade their Slow Burn Sloth effigies with one another. However, Dr. Chung revoked the social interaction periods and began confining the subjects to separate Euclid class containment cells when violence began to break out between them. It became clear that during their 150-second periods of lucidity every 24 hours, the subjects would become extremely distressed, agitated, and even aggressive. Dr. Chung also ordered any idols, from trash sculptures to doodles and notes on fragmented scraps of paper, to be destroyed immediately. At its new increased power, the Foundation became concerned that SCP-2774-A may develop the power to manifest through these images. No meaningful headway was being made on a cure for the condition, so something needed to be done before the situation got out of hand. In hopes of gaining a better understanding of the internal processes of Slow Burn Sloth victims, Dr. Chung decided to conduct a series of interviews with the subjects under her care. Two such subjects, Subject 0866 aka David and Subject 7444 aka Claire, were isolated for a 24-hour period in hopes of catching them during their daily 150 seconds of lucidity. Dr. Chung and the Foundation found the results of these 2 interviews to be as illuminating as they were utterly terrifying. When David regained lucidity, he was in a state of extreme agitation and showed an unsettling fixation on the clock in the Site-116 interview room. Under direct questioning from Dr. Chung, he revealed that Slow Burn Sloth victims are fully aware of what's happening during their zombified periods. He compared the sensation to being a passenger, trapped and bound in a vehicle over which they have no control. However, in this state, victims are also unable to hold a thought consistently for longer than 5 seconds. This leaves them in an almost constant state of disorientation. Worse still, David describes that victims are subjected to near-constant hallucinations of the original sloth image, guiding and controlling their movements, almost like a puppeteer. Thanks to the clock, David was aware of when his 150 seconds of lucidity were about to come to an end. After apologizing for what he was about to do, David lunged at Dr. Chung, causing a guard present in the interview room to shoot him dead for Dr. Chung's protection. Dr. Chung's interview with Claire echoed the same sentiment. During her 150 seconds of lucidity, Claire first begged to be killed, before divulging further details about the zombification state. She would describe hallucinations of the Slow Burn Sloth stalking her constantly and controlling her movements. In some cases, the sloth would force her to open her eyes all night, while it stands next to her bed and screams at her. As Claire's 150 seconds of lucidity ended and she became non-responsive, Dr. Chung put in a request for Claire's termination, a request that was fulfilled 3 days later. The third interview with subject 9225, also known as Jason, showed that SCP-2774-A appeared to be manually starting the fights between the subjects, perhaps even for its own sadistic amusement. He also stated before the interview's conclusion that the image of the sloth in his hallucinations was becoming darker and more tangible, almost like it was becoming a real physical being, which was an unprecedented phenomenon. Dr. Chung was, for the first time in a while, truly afraid. It seemed by all accounts that SCP-2774-A's power was growing considerably as a result of its huge number of active victims. Its infection rate had likely risen well above 40%, and its ability to manifest would likely be on the rise too. If the Slow Burn Sloth was able to manifest on a national broadcast, millions would be infected, to truly apocalyptic results. Dr. Chung only saw one solution that might curtail the entity's growing power, but it wouldn't be pretty. She devised a procedure known as Procedure XXJ9. As part of the procedure, additional staff were brought into Site-116 immediately. The real purpose of the plan was revealed shortly afterward: to reduce the number of active subjects on site from 6,400 to a mere 200 in hopes of reducing risk. Over the next several days, staff at Site-116 engaged in the gruesome task of executing around 6,200 infected subjects via lethal injection. This was an atrocity so horrific, even by SCP Foundation standards, that Dr. Chung allowed the parties involved to use Class A amnestics to erase their memories of being involved in the mass murder of Site-116's subjects. In the aftermath of the call, the Foundation did report a decrease in SCP-2774-A's manifestations, so Dr. Chung's procedure did indeed work, just at a heavy human toll. The tragic incident of the 2010 Harper Ridge SCP-2774 containment breach is a grim reminder of just how far the SCP Foundation is willing to go to do their job, and a reminder to be careful where you look, because some images have a much more lasting impact than others. Now go check out SCP-5049 The Skin Salesman Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot and The Secret at the Bottom of SCP-087 Explained for more frightening anomalous horrors from the SCP Foundation.